Here on the screen, I have his chart, Dane Rudhyar, born March 23rd, 1895, at 1 p.m. And this is a Rodis rating of AA at 1 a.m. in Paris, France. There is a rectified birth time of 12:42 a.m. And I have that chart here as well. Here's a picture of Dane Rudhyar that I took off Astro Data Bank as a young man. And in the corner, you'll see him. He lived to a ripe old age of 90 and died at his balsamic sun-moon blend. Astrology is a language. If you understand this language, the sky speaks to you. And when you don't follow your nature, there's a hole in the universe where you were supposed to be. Quite amazing. Dane Rudhyar had quite an incredible life. He was ill as a child, and at the age of 12, he had a kidney and an adrenal gland removed. And because of that, he was homeschooled. He was quite brilliant, graduating from university at the age of 16, and his first career was music. And so he had quite a prolific career in music as well, too. And about the age of, I've forgotten the age of 21, it's quite amazing that his music was being played by the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Amazing, So he moved to the US, and about the age of 25 to 27, he changed his name. He used the name Rudhyar, comes from a Sanskrit deity called Rudra, which is known by many things, a Hindu god of wind or storm, also known as severe roarer or howler, could be a hurricane or a tempest, and also meaning one who eradicates problems from their roots. So quite interesting on that. And his career is quite interesting. A brilliant man. You can see from the chart, he's an Aries sun. He has a moon in Aquarius, quite, a genius level to have been through university at a young age, composing at a young age, studying things like Nietzsche at an early age, introduced to the work of Carl Jung and just absorbing it. Really, he was widely read and widely researched. And this influenced, of course, his astrological understandings. So you can perhaps, I've got a lot
So
about
Rose,
his, yes.
I have a question. If he had come to you as a young man, say confused about what to do, what in here jumps out at you, if anything, about the music? Because that the first career was music, and then actually paralleling Noel Till that we just talked about, and then turned to astrology. What do you see in the chart that suggests that?
Music is a Taurus archetype, and it's a Pisces archetype, and he has Mercury in the sign of Pisces, and he has a North Node in Pisces. So, those are kind of musical statements. But let me just get into the chart from the evolutionary perspective, Ken.
Sure.
So, as an evolutionary astrologer, the first thing that we are looking for is the soul path, and looking to Pluto to describe what the soul's journey is. And in this chart, Pluto is located in the sixth house of the chart in the sign of Gemini, and Mars is right beside it. Sorry, I want to go to my next page because I actually put it up this way. And in terms of looking at it through the eyes of evolutionary astrology, here I pulled out only the planetary signatures that we would start to do an interpretation in terms of evolutionary astrology. And this is Jeffrey Wolf Green method, right? So
Sure.
looking to Pluto, and Pluto's in the sign of Gemini, and it's a sixth house archetype. And of course, Gemini is the necessity to bring in diverse information. All right, so to explore many different ideologies and to information gather. Gemini is an information gathering archetype. And what is so interesting about this particular soul path signature is that Pluto is sitting right here with this trio in the sixth house, but most importantly, Mars. Pluto is sitting at 9 degrees, almost 10 degrees of Gemini, and Mars is sitting at 12. And in evolutionary astrology, Pluto represents the big picture soul, the desires of the soul for one's evolution. And Mars is the embodiment of soul desires. This is the cutting edge of soul desires in any given moment. And the relationship of Mars and Pluto are going to talk about, kind of where one is on that evolutionary schematic. And when you see Mars and Pluto here, Mars is only, about 2-ish degrees past Pluto. So Mars and Pluto are in a new phase. And this is a suggestion of a whole new evolutionary journey having recently begun in terms of information gathering, in terms of bringing more information in for the growth of the soul and the growth of understanding. And from there, in terms of evolutionary astrology, I would go to the nodal axis, the south node. And the south node is sitting in the 9th house. It is in the sign of Virgo. And Virgo is one of the two signs that Mercury rules. So we've got an affinity here, Pluto's soul path in the sign of Gemini. We've got the south node in the sign of Virgo. So we have Mercury, right? And ruler Mercury is sitting here in the 2nd house in the sign of Pisces. So in the 9th house is the archetype of Sagittarius. In the 9th house, it's all about belief systems, correct? So it's all about belief systems. And this Virgo, archetype is an exploration in terms of what belief systems there are. And in terms of the Virgo process, well, of course, the 9th house has to do with publishing, and, it's going to be an investigation in terms of belief systems, philosophies, religion, spirituality, metaphysics. And in terms of that, looking at that, there's purpose here for that south node in terms of analyzing the data that has been taken in to decide with Virgo what is useful and purposeful and applicable to the evolving form. And, Rudhyar was somewhat disillusioned by the way humanity was evolving and so on. And Virgo, there's a suggestion here of work and service, right? And the Pluto position, Pluto and Mars, is suggesting a new evolutionary journey in this lifetime to be a messenger, to provide information, to fill in missing blanks, which is what Virgo is really about. In terms of service to humanity, really, in looking at this south node relative to that Mars and Pluto in a new phase. And let me also say that Mars is a faster moving planet, and it is in balsamic relationship to Neptune. And Neptune is the ruler of this north node. And this planet, Mars, in balsamic cycle to Neptune, balsamic cycle. And Dane Rudhyar, his book, The Lunation Cycle, it was a a foremost book, and everyone should read it. A very simple little book on the sun-moon blend and the lunar phases and so on, which are such a huge part of evolutionary astrology. We not only measure the sun and moon in terms of their phasal relationship, but we measure everything on the page in terms of phasal relationships. Yes.
Okay, I got to pause you there
Yes.
because Maurice is here and I want to give him equal time to talk as well. We do have a question though, and actually both of you can answer this.
May I just finish the one little tiny statement before you go on, Kenneth? I was sorry. I was just going to say that in terms of balsamic, you're completing, but you're also seeding for the future. And Dane Rudhyar really saw himself as a seed, a seed person in terms of providing this information. I apologize for interrupting you.
So someone in the Andre wants to know the Mercury in detriment. Actually, Mercury's in fall, but and Jupiter. Do you take planetary dignity into account in evolutionary astrology, or your practice of it?
We don't really concentrate on dignities, and they are relevant, and you are welcome to use them.
Yeah, basically, thank you, Rose, bringing, Mercury is going to be so vital because the emphasis on Gemini and Virgo. And we see here, Mercury is in Pisces, which, both Mercury and Jupiter are knowledge oriented. And we see from Rudhyar's perspective that he was really so eclectic and so diverse. And we can argue that his health wasn't really so strong, but as far as the body of knowledge and his pioneering influence in the body of knowledge of astrology is no detriment or fall, in this category. We really see that he used that Jupiter and that Mercury to the highest expression, so to speak. Now, I don't know him personally, and I don't know if he, had problems communicating or if he was clear in his speech and things like that. But as far as the legacy of the Jupiter and Mercury, we can all be sure that he brought the highest. And the reason we don't focus so much on dignities in evolutionary astrology is because every placement has its natural place in the sky. There is a positive and a shadow to every placement. And I think that's very much the work of Rudhyar. As Rose was describing, he saw himself as a seeding force. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm using a slightly adjusted time because on astro.com they mentioned he rectified his time.
Yes, I mentioned that a few moments ago. Yes.
So it doesn't make a huge difference as far as the house placements, but he was an Aries born close to an eclipse. He was just before the new moon. And people born on eclipses or during eclipse season are usually people who can have that sense of destiny, something larger than, the trivial 9-to-5 job, like this feeling of a higher calling. And here in Aries, born almost on the equinox point, definitely brings that seeding quality of wanting to bring something completely new. And his realization, his change of identity, and his move from France to the United States occurred when Pluto was at the first degrees of Cancer, so squaring his sun, and Uranus was on his moon. So once again, we see this transformative quality. But what was he seeding, right? He was seeding the humanistic approach to astrology, which means moving away from a fate oriented perspective to a developmental, evolutionary, growth oriented approach to astrology and to life. And you see that he's born in that generation of the Pluto Neptune of the end of the 19th century, which saw many people, spiritual teachers, Yogananda, Krishnamurti, and also evil people like Hitler, born around that time, because it was a time where these people born during that time had such an influence on the collective. And being in Gemini, to me, really was the ushering in this age of bringing Eastern philosophies more so into the West. So the movement of yoga coming to the West, reincarnation coming to the West, after years of being under the shadows. So Rudhyar was pioneering, not just in the field of astrology, but bringing this more free will orientation, growth orientation into the astrology menu. And I think this is also very descriptive of his nodes in Virgo, Pisces, squared by Jupiter and Neptune, wide aspect. Because Virgo has very much to do with what can I change? What is up to me? How can I improve? Versus Pisces has to do with surrender, the things I can't change. It's very much that serenity prayer of having the courage and the wisdom to know the difference between what you can and cannot change. So I think these nodes really capture the message of fate and free will, of the humanistic approach to astrology and the fusion of Eastern and Western philosophies. And the fact that it happened on an eclipse, that he was born around the eclipse, is adding a stronger influence into the collective consciousness. I also want to share this page. This is an article written by Chet Zdorsky, who has done extensive research on Dane Rudhyar, interviewed many people who knew him. And so if you're interested, it's on astro.com under the OPA category. You can find a lot about his biography and his chart.
Do we know what year he arrived in the United States?
November 1916. And his whole identity crisis or transformation happened the year after, in 1917. And it's interesting, he was broke, he came to the States, and what did he do with all that Gemini? He spent hours in libraries studying, occult sciences, and of course, joining the theosophical movement in his early, in the early stages of his astrology career. And so what I feel, having these three slow-moving planets and Mars sandwiched between Pluto and Neptune brings again that emphasis between the things I can and cannot change, and developing that body of knowledge that speaks to human development, not only large events. Like he wanted to move away from just the mundane aspect of astrology and the fate-oriented aspect of astrology, which is, as you invited us, evolutionary astrologer, it's very much the focus of our practice. So Dane Rudhyar was definitely a pioneer that influenced the movement of evolutionary astrology. And his book, Astrology of Transformation, which was his last book. I think his main books was his first one, The Astrology of Personality, and then the last one, Astrology of Transformation, where he highlights the fact that the same chart can be used at different levels of evolution. And I think that was such an important marker for astrology, that people born with the same charts, whether they're twins or astrology twins, well, don't necessarily have the same fate. So having the same chart doesn't guarantee you're going to have the same life. And part of what he pins it on is on the fact that we're not born with the same level of consciousness. You know, he takes into account the reincarnation factor. So there's a level of basically understanding that you can apply the same chart at a lower vibration, and that as you grow and as you evolve, you can apply it to a higher level of consciousness. And that's part of the growth. If we speak of fate and free will, you know, you cannot change your chart. That you're fated to your chart. But what do you do with your chart? That is the free will factor. And so, you know, we see those pioneering qualities, both in what Rose was describing, this new phase between Mars and Pluto, the Aries eclipse, and not to be underestimated, it's also a wide conjunction between Saturn and Uranus. Again, tradition, Saturn versus new thought, new concept, new paradigm. Uranus, it's in the 11th house, which is also a house associated with astrology, with higher knowledge. And so that's fascinating.
Yeah, and you know, as Maurice was saying, the nodes, you know, which are so important in evolutionary astrology, Virgo and Pisces, that fate and free will. It was this whole idea of acceptance, you know, which is the Pisces archetype, and synthesis, which is the Pisces archetype, and wholeness, which is the Pisces archetype. Pisces is the archetype of potential. And Rudhyar saw the potentiality, and he himself was evolving throughout the entirety of his life. He flourished in the 20s and 30s, you know, and wrote about the outer planets and the outer planet cycles, you know, and Pluto was just discovered in the 30s. I mean, you know, he absorbed all of Jung's work and just, you know, really integrated that into all of his writings. And then again in the 90s, you know, as that Pluto-Uranus transit was going over his south node, he had another resurgence. You know, Gemini is about waves, and he had, you know, many waves of flourishing, you know, in terms of his productivity and also, you know, his popularity, both musically and for his astrology and so on. I actually have a slide I want to share, if I may. I wanted to give you, in Dane Rudhyar's own words here, you know, this is the foreword to Planetarization of Consciousness, 1976. And in looking at his chart, and the bolded words in here relate exactly to the astrology. You know, the present, and I've kind of capsulized some of this, the present tidal wave of interest in astrology and various forms of esoteric astrology, philosophy, and occultism was rolling, engulfing not only the rebellious and confusedly idealistic youth, you know, third house Gemini archetype of the tumultuous 60s, but also tearing loose as well many middle-aged minds. You know, we have that Saturn and Scorpio retrograde and so on, of some improbable adventure. And that's that kind of idealism here, which, you know, again, Pisces is an archetype of disillusionment. And it was disillusionment that led Rudhyar to, you know, his next adventure and next explorations here. the state of expectancy, and that's a Virgo archetype, expectancy with, with apprehension and fear, which he was teaching, the idea of meeting up with your fate, not to face it with fear and trepidation, but with some acceptance here. Anyway, the state of expectancy with a heavy mix of boredom, a total Gemini archetype, seasoned with a sense of futility. And futility consciousness comes into Virgo Pisces quite often, in Virgo itself, because you can never get to wherever it is you think you might be getting to here. Can open a door to many strange visitation. Discrimination, Virgo archetype, is not often implied in expectancy. On what basis then can the expectant and aspiring mind discriminate? Where is the touchstone of validity? And are there absolute truths revealed in some unquestionable perennial philosophy? It perfectly describes the nodal axis, the squares to the nodal axis, and the polarity point of Pluto, which you can't see on the screen, but would be located in the 12th house in the sign of Sagittarius. For many years in my youth, I'd felt that I'd found such a truth, but rather bitter experiences had cast a shadow on some of the channels through which this truth was reaching our Western mentality. In my 40s, I'd been forced to relentlessly question, and that's another Virgo, always asking the question, why? What my mind had absorbed, and to ask myself where I really stood. So constantly questioning. I have been too much occupied in several fields of activity, and my life has been so nomadic, Sagittarius archetype, Gemini archetype, that it has been impossible for me to keep well ordered in files of reference. He wrote elaborately in that Virgo piece, but the scatteredness, that's Jupiter and Gemini, so on.
I'm
Besides,
afraid we are at the clock.
Okay.
But I think everyone can kind of skim those last
Skim
couple.
those last words, but you can see how, he was absolutely, as Maurice said, born under just, between two eclipses, absolutely, absolutely special destiny.
Yeah. Well, and we're still talking about him today, so
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you both for appearing. Rose,
happy Astrology Day, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you. Happy Astrology Day to everyone out there.